Hi everybody, welcome to the BDO People Advisory webinar for, where are we? We are in May. Thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. We're really excited to bring you today's panelists. So first of all, I'll give you a brief introduction to who's on the call today. We've got myself, Jenine Waters. I lead our National People Advisory service here at BDO. I don't know the order that you're seeing everybody in, but we have Vanessa Vaillant and Annie-Claude Bélisle Denis, who are in our People Advisory team and lead our change management. Maryanne Carter, who's Associate Director in my team. And we also have Grant Saxon joining us today. So most of you who are on our webinars regularly will know most of our faces, but Grant is actually our Office Managing Director, and he's joining us today to give us a bit of a different perspective. So you're not just going to hear from the People Advisory team today, you're also going to hear from someone on the ground in a leadership role as we work through our topic of today, which is all about inspiring people through change. So before we kick off, I'm just going to take you through a few housekeeping issues. So you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a questions pane. So feel free along the way, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, we're happy to make this a really interactive session. So type your questions and we'll get to you as soon as we have a break in the conversation. If you have any technical difficulties, there's a little button with the letter I there. So if you click on that, that'll help you resolve any technical difficulties. There aren't any slides today. However, after this session, we're going to have an email that'll come out to each of you. You'll see an attachment back to the recording of this broadcast, and you'll be able to see all of our future and past webinars as well, and you'll have our contact details. And we'll be very happy to hear from you if you want to reach out and ask any questions after today's session. So to kick off, I'm going to introduce you to Annie-Claude. Annie is an amazing change manager in my team, and most of you won't actually have met her because this is the first webinar Annie-Claude is joining us for, so welcome. And I'm going to hand over to Annie-Claude because not only is it her first one as a guest, she's actually going to lead the conversation today. So Annie-Claude, over to you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today. I've listened to quite a few webinars and I was really excited to be on my first one. And I thought, what best way to kick things off than to invite our local managing director. So thank you, Grant, for accepting the invitation and be here with us today. A little bit about myself, just quickly, I joined the team in January, so fairly new. I'm from Canada, and that's where you'll hear my weird French-Canadian accent from. But I'm learning the Aussie language more and more every day. Really excited to be here today and talk about inspiring people through change. Vanessa and I both work in change management, and our day-to-day job is to work with leaders and help them inspire people through change, which is not an easy task. When we talk about change management, there's still a lot of people today that just don't know what it is, and I think that's very normal, so it's part of our job to work on that education. We'll start with asking you a question, Jenine. So my role today will really be I'm here to learn from all of you guys. We've got great leaders and great advisors today, so I'll just be directing questions to you guys to learn more from you. Jenine, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thanks, Annie-Claude. My background before I joined BDO, and I've now been at BDO for 4 years. I had 20 years in in-house HR roles, leadership roles, heading up HR in certain organisations. And then I joined BDO 4 years ago and started the People Advisory service line here in Sydney. And I now lead the National People Advisory Service, and I sit on our local executive team.
That's quite an introduction, and I really like how you bring so many different perspectives to the table, and that's why the first question I'd like to ask you is, from all of your experiences you've had over the years, how would you define what change management is?
Thanks, Annie-Claude. So it's interesting, you know, because I have been involved peripherally in change management for most of my career. And in fact, if you had asked me what change management was 20 years ago when I was in HR roles, I would have said, look, it's really just a bit of communication, some training, making sure that people are aware of what change is going to impact them. And, you know, then you move forward with a change program. And that was probably as much thought as I ever really put into change. It's been interesting as I've worked through different roles. We've become far more change agile in every organisation I've worked in. You know, change has become the norm. And then now working as an advisor to other organisations, I have seen that there's far more complexity to a good change program. And it really is an art form. And when I think about change now, I think, yes, it's all about shifting behaviour. So really trying to make sure that whatever change you're implementing, whether it's a system, whether it's a culture shift, whether it's an organizational restructure, whatever it is, it's trying to make sure that the behavioral shifts that you're trying to make happen really do happen and stick. And to me, the art form in that is that it's not at all a one-way communication. It's not sending out a few emails, inviting people to some lunch and learns and hoping that you get there. It's actually all about bringing people on the journey for change. It's a lot more about listening than it is about talking and communicating. It's about trying to really understand who are the people that you're impacting with this change, what's important to them, and how do you bring them along on that journey.
Thanks, Jenine. I very much agree with all you just said, and I like how your experience both as a leader and as an HR person is giving you so many different perspectives. Grant, can you please, so everyone knows here on the line that you are our local managing partner, but maybe that's all they know about you, so could you please introduce yourself a little bit?
Thanks, Annie-Claude. That's all they're going to know about me. I don't know that I really want to tell them the rest. No, but look, thanks for inviting me onto this, because I think it's actually so relevant given everything that not just BDO is going through at the moment, but what most organisations are going through, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, look, my background. So I'm a long-term, trained as an accountant, and here I am talking about change management. I used to I was heading up our audit team here at BDO for a number of years, and then about somewhere between 4 and 5 years ago, I became the managing partner or managing director of the Sydney practice. So we've got about 400 to 450 people across this office, ranging from senior partners through to cadets who are straight out of high school. So it's a pretty diverse workforce. And I think in any leadership position in professional services firms, you very quickly become the master of herding cats, and that's what I do. So that's what we're doing, and there's lots of change going on. So.
And we've all had the chance to work with you on a precise project. So we've been working on making BDO a much more flexible workplace. And that's the second time around that we're leading this project here at BDO, and there's been a lot more change management involvement, and it's been a lot more people focused. I'd like to ask you how different for you from a leader's perspective, how has it been to have change management involved this time around?
Yeah, so thanks, Annie-Claude. It's a good case study, because I inherited a supposedly agile workplace from my predecessor, but it wasn't. They'd put a whole lot of physical changes into the office when the office was redesigned, and it was almost like, here you go away and work more flexibly. And people just weren't doing it. There was you could see the workflows were getting caught up in old habits. People were occupying desks and just piling them full of their usual rubbish. And so there was definitely a need to do something. Now, we didn't have a burning platform to make change with this, but what was happening was when I sort of came into this role, we were going through an evolution within the firm, and we were embarking on a fairly strong phase of growth. So as the firm has grown and grown very quickly, particularly over the last 3 years or so, we've had some pressure on the amount of floor space that we need to occupy. So that was not, I wouldn't say that was a burning platform, but it was a good rationale to make change. And when I looked at it, I said, okay, well, it's not about just getting more floor space or rearranging the office or what it might be. If you look at the way we work, we could embed a much stronger culture if we start listening to how our people need to work and building the workplace around that, both physically and culturally. So it has been quite an interesting journey. It's an interesting project. I think, you know, bringing the change management, you know, what have we done differently? Because I won't say it's worked 100%. You know, there's still a few sort of little niggly things that don't quite work. But a couple of things that we did. One was that we went out to people who were detractors, if you like, or people that might not embrace change, and involve them and brought them into the process, because you know, I feel that everybody has a reason to either embrace change or to resist change, and what we need to do is to understand what those reasons are and then bring them on the journey. And a few of those detractors, we'll call them detractors, they actually became sponsors of the project, and once they become sponsors of the project, they can actually influence other people in the organisation as you're making change. So I think that's a really important thing to do. And the other thing is just to understand, you know, each person, you know, or groups of people, what their needs are, so that you can be flexible enough to adapt to their own why and address their own why, and bring people along for the journey. So I think that's, you know, if you wanted to say what have we done differently, I'd say that's what it is.
Thank you, Grant. I had some technical issues on my end here, so I only had the chance to hear half of what you said, but I'm hearing now, I'm hearing better, so thank you for sharing with the rest of them. I'll have to ask Jenine what you said after this. Maryanne, if we could move over to you, could you please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about what you've done in the past years as an HR professional?
Sure. So thanks, Annie-Claude. I'm really excited to be here. My background, like Jenine, has been in HR. I've led HR teams in Australia and overseas. I've loved what I've done, and I've really loved partnering with leaders. So change from a HR perspective is something I'm very, very, you know, good at understanding.
And could you tell us a little bit more about what you've seen in your experience, and how different it is if change management is led by change managers, or if it's led by HR experts or HR business partners?
Sure. So what I'd say is everyone has different capabilities. So I'm sure there might be some really amazing HR people out there that would have the depth in change management, but I'm going to talk broadly here. So when you approach it from a HR perspective, what you are really trying to do is a very focused thing. So you are trying to get people from A to Z as easily as possible by listening to them, by hearing what they've got to say, by mentoring line managers and helping them with communication. Now that is great, and actually it works a treat when you're not working in complex areas. However, if you are needing to now put processes, systems, technology and people and align them all together, all of a sudden the managing of that and the ability to get all the sequencing right so that it makes a difference to the person actually doing the work, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And for me, that is when you need change managers. That is when you need to start to really invest in a particular capability, because it's not easy bringing everything together so that it makes a difference for the person actually doing their job.
Thanks, Maryanne. And Vanessa, we kept you last for this very first question. Can you first tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Vaillant. I'm originally from the BDO Canada office and transitioned to the sunshine of Australia 2 years ago, working in the People Advisory team. And I'm a change manager just like you, Annie. Supported large technology transformations, supported shifts in operating models, supported process improvement, just the range of changes you can think of, workplace transitions, moving to open concept. I've played a lead change role in some of those big transformations in Australia and in Canada.
And I can only imagine you had to explain to a lot of people in your life, both your friends, your family, but in the professional context as well, to explain to them what is change management. Now, if I told you that we have about 100 professionals on the line right now with us today, how would you explain to them what is change management?
Yeah, it's a funny one because everyone knows it's important and it's kind of the hot topic and the buzzword that's become top of mind in the last year for all leaders, but it's quite tricky to articulate. And I guess there are lots of technical definitions that are available out there, but from my perspective, I say it's around acknowledging and recognizing when you're fundamentally changing how someone does their job. And then it's identifying what support they need to really embrace and adopt whatever that change or that new way of working is. Because at the end of the day, it's not the organization that changes, it's the people that have to embrace and have to change how they do their jobs. And that's the tricky part, is as humans, we're quite unpredictable, and emotion plays into it and drives our behavior. And that's what makes change management such a worthwhile investment and such a necessity, but also at the same time so challenging. At BDO, we do follow a process with tools and techniques to bring people along, but ultimately, as Jenine, Grant, and Maryanne have been saying, you know, the value is in the execution of that process and how you're able to bring the different pieces together, and that often happens behind the scenes. So from my perspective, it's much more than just completing a template. It's, you know, your ability to build relationships with those that are being impacted at the front line. It's your ability to understand how the processes are changing. What are the communications and the training requirements? How do you influence the sponsor and support them to step into their role? And there is no one size fits all. Every organizational culture is different. Every change is different in terms of complexity. But I will say that the most successful change programs that I have been on are driven by the people themselves, not just the change of the project team.
And I think it leads very well into why the theme of our webinar today is inspiring people through change. And so it's more than just making sure we get from point A to point B. It's also involving everyone and making sure that people find their own what's in it for me in that. So the job that we'll do as change managers is that we'll support leaders and we'll help them inspire people through change. It's challenging, and we are quite demanding with leaders because we're asking them not only to tell people how it is, but to inspire them through that. And it's quite a powerful word when you think about it. For me, the first thing that I'll start doing with a leader is get them inspired, because how can you inspire people if you're not inspired yourself? So what I'll do is we'll try to sit with them and just find their own inspiration, understand what's in it for me, what's in it for my team. And it's not always easy because there are some changes that the reasons why you're doing them are quite strong and they're quite attractive. And some of them, well, you have to do it. So Grant, we've been working together for the past 2-3 months, like probably all the businesses around the world, with this whole COVID-19 thing. And so from one day to the other, you found yourself in a position where you had to inspire people through that COVID change. And I think we can all agree that a pandemic, a global pandemic, it's not as easy to find the inspiring aspects of it as an investment in a new technology, for example. So how did you adapt, and how did you put yourself in that situation where you were able to inspire the 400 employees at the Sydney office?
Yeah, thanks, Annie-Claude. Look, I think in this case, you know, I said before with the agility project that we were talking about, there was no real burning platform. There was no you know, severe urgency. I think in this case, there is a burning platform, there is urgency, and so we had a choice to do we fight this, you know, the old fight or flight. So we did choose to fight, and you know, there was a sense of urgency. So what we did is we, you know, rallied together the troops, if you like, a leadership team that has the ability, you know, a fairly diverse leadership team that has different skills that can help guide the organisation through what was really uncharted waters. And I shouldn't say we were making it up as we went along, but we were to an extent. But when you surround yourselves with the right people, with the right skills and the right experience, you can navigate through these things. You know, so I see, you know, any leadership role, we have to continue to be change agents, and we have to respond to circumstances. And this is just a, you know, a big, hairy, scary circumstance that we have to respond to. So for me, you know, how do I inspire people? I think number one, you've just got to be authentic. Like, you know, we've got, you know, of our 400 people, 399 of them are pretty intelligent. So you can't, you know, you've got to be pretty upfront and honest. Don't try and bullshit people. You know, I think they'll wake up to that very quickly. So you need to be open in your communication. You need to explain that, you know, what the positives are, what the negatives are, and why you're making decisions. And I think if you can be authentic around that, you will, you know, people will follow and come onto that journey. The other thing that we've kept doing, and Jenine and I were talking about this the other day, whenever we got to a difficult decision to make around, it might be workforce management during this period, or it might be communications around this period, or it might be some material that we're putting out to our client base. If you get to something where you're struggling to find a resolution, we go back to our values. So we've done a lot of work around organisational values within BDO. And those things are like the shining light. And as soon as you sort of feel like you're going off course, just bring the team back to the values, and you know, 9 times out of 10 that will help you get through it. And I've found that that's really worked for us through this period.
And what I really like about hearing you say this, Grant, is I think the executive team really got together and focused on those values. But as we asked questions to the staff through surveys, we also got that feedback from them that they felt that BDO was living to its values. So not only were the decisions made on those, but it was felt and it was received very positively by the staff.
Yeah, so it worked. Well, we're still going, but it's working.
We're on the good path.
Yep. Okay.
Oh, I think we lost Annie-Claude there. That's okay. I'll jump in. Luckily, I know what question she was going to ask, Maryanne, so I'm sure Annie-Claude will be back in a minute. We're all dealing with the variables of the, you know, NBN and all of that sort of stuff. So,
Jenine,
you know, lucky us. Yeah.
Jenine, before we move on to the question that Annie-Claude wanted to ask me, I'm just wondering from Grant, why, Grant, did you lean on values? Why did you not lean on a number? Or because
yeah, look,
when I talk to a lot of
and leading some changes as well, and some great ones, some that were tougher as well. I'm thinking about some reorganizations when there's some really
so I don't know if anyone can hear me, but I didn't really hear Maryanne's question. But anyway,
it was why values? Why values, and why not, you know, just purely looking at the bottom line, for example, or purely looking at what was our customers, you know, asking for? We did very much go back to those values from day one, frankly, in the first decision that we made to exit the building early. So why was that what you drew on?
Yeah, and look, I mean, there's a natural inclination in a firm that's, you know, largely made up of people with accounting backgrounds. There's a natural inclination to go to the bottom line. And, you know, how can we get through this by saving costs or, you know, cutting back on expenditure or whatever it might be. And my view of that is, look, we need to be cognizant of that, absolutely. And we need to manage our costs. But the organisation, any organisation has a much longer life than, you know, the short term that we're dealing with. So, you know, we want to come through this period, we want to come through the period A, and B, we want to come through the period stronger and in a better position. And so therefore that shining light that I talk about, which is the values, that's what's going to outlast this year's profit or next year's profit, or, you know, partners take home pay or whatever it might be. And if you get that right, I think the bottom line stuff will look after itself anyway. So I just think you've got to find some central purpose in the organisation, and that really is built around our values. So I find that's the longer term way of approaching it, rather than just making short term decisions which could be counterproductive in the long run.
I love hearing that, and I love hearing it for a few reasons. One is that when I speak to other MDs, some of them, they're a little lost in terms of how you balance the bottom line, and I don't even think values will often come to the mind at the forefront. So just to hear that and to hear about the longevity, I think will help. Like, it helps people anchor themselves. So very fortunate at the moment, I am.
I think we're having small difficulties hearing you, Maryanne, but let's try to build on that, because I think when we're able to hear what you have to say, it's very powerful. And I like how you try to go to Grant and understand the reasons behind the values and the numbers. And I know that you've led some changes yourself as well, some tough ones. And that's what I was saying earlier, that I think I got disconnected, but here we're back with that same question. What I'd like to understand from you is how, as a leader, did you find the inspiration in those tougher changes you had to lead?
So you're asking me or Maryanne?
No, that was for Maryanne.
I thought so, yeah.
So sometimes when you don't have inspiration internally, it's really hard to find it. Can you hear me okay?
It's iffy.
Kind of.
Maybe
go to someone else.
Yeah. Let's move on to Vanessa, and we can come back to Maryanne when her broadband gets a bit stronger.
Yes. Vanessa, what I wanted to ask you is, I know that you've had to work with some leaders that maybe weren't all that inspired by changes, and part of your role is to help them get to that point. So what have you, are there some experiences you want to tell us about that you had to do that with some leaders?
Yeah, sure, Annie. I mean, the reality of it is not every change is exciting and innovative and you're fully bought into. It will fundamentally change how you work for the better. Sometimes changes come as a result of regulatory shifts from the environment, and sometimes they're factors that are completely out of your control, as the world is experiencing with COVID. And I guess for me, the starting point is to understand where the gap is, working with the leader or the sponsor, and even more broadly with some of the leaders in the organization. Is the gap in the lack of inspiration, where is it coming from? So is it that I'm not clear, as a leader, I'm not clear onto why we're changing, or I don't see or believe in the burning platform? Is it the fact that it wasn't my idea and now I'm being asked to implement it, which happens often with as roles switch at that level? Is it that you just don't see the value, or sometimes it can even be that I'm just not clear on my role as a sponsor and what that means, because there's a lot that rides on that and it's hugely impactful, and sometimes there's a fear of admitting that I'm not exactly clear what I'm meant to do in that role. So whatever it may be, it's about understanding specifically for that leader and that sponsor, what is the root cause of that lack of desire and inspiration, and is that something we can help close in terms of equipping them with the knowledge or the tools or supporting them. And that's the value we bring as change managers, is helping them work through those reactions and understand the critical role they need to play and how best we can help them, because it is a tough gig to be leading an organization or leading a team on top of your day job. It's a particular skill to be focused on that and to continuously be moving forward and staying connected to the why and listening to your people and influencing them as you go. But if you are leading a team through a change, I can most certainly say that your team, your direct reports, and the organization at large, depending where you sit in that leadership structure, is looking to you for clarity and for inspiration. I can say that as a guarantee.
And for me, Vanessa, what you just said is that I translated in a short version that leading change is hard. It is, and I maybe should have said that when I introduced myself first, but I do a lot of sports metaphor in my mind. I'm a very big fan of sports in general. And when I think of leading change, I just think, well, it doesn't have to be an individual sport. You can play it as a team sport, because you're only as strong as the people on your team. And so we often look at the same leaders to lead the changes, right? They have the charisma, or they have they just have the position or the credibility in the organization. So we always go back to those same leaders. And I see Jenine, Grant, and Maryanne smiling and nodding. And I think you've been targeted quite a few times in your lives. Well, would you like to please sponsor this change, lead this change? And as you said, Vanessa, it's a job on top of your day job as well. For me, one of the key elements is to surround yourself with the right people. Jenine, I know you've played different roles, and that's why I always go back to you with those questions. What's the ideal team, in your opinion, that a leader should surround themselves with?
First of all, I think what's really important is recognizing no matter what your job, you all will bring different skill sets to it. So even looking at Annie-Claude and Vanessa here, you both have really strong change management skills, but you also have different strengths that you bring to play in that. And when I think about that in my role too, it's really easy to think, well, you know, I've been in HR for so long, I should be across all of this, I should know change really well. But in actual fact, every single time I've brought somebody new into the People Advisory team, it's highlighted to me the areas that I'm not great at, and I can't be good at everything. So I think the first thing is being really strong and understanding what is your strength that you bring to play. You know, if it's communication skills, great. If you just love being able to be the face of things and you're really happy to get up front and talk, that's fantastic. Be clear about this is the strength I bring to it, and what I need behind me is people who have some of the processes in place and can help guide me through that. So I think one is around being clear on your strengths, being clear on, well, what are the gaps then, and opening yourself up to the fact that I can't be everything, so who can I surround myself with? And it's really interesting because I will often play, and Annie-Claude and I laugh a little bit because, you know, in my role, I will often play that support role to other executives in the business, and I might be pushing them along. And then I often turn to people in my team and go, right, oh, I need your help now, because now I'm out of my depth, or now I'm stretched too thin, and I actually need you guys to support me so I can do the best job that I can do. So that's one thing. The other thing for me is around recognizing that it doesn't always have to just be one sponsor. So, you know, we've done some amazing changes with clients, and I think one in particular we looked at, it was really shifting the way HR functioned in the organization. And the natural inclination is, well, your sponsor is your lead in HR, and he's great. He's really into this change and he's very driven by it. But he was coming up with against a lot of obstacles as he was starting to try to implement this shift. And we very quickly looked at, well, we need a coalition of sponsorship here. It's actually not just about HR shifting and changing the way they operate. It's actually about understanding what's the commercial imperative behind this as well, and what are our business sponsors really thinking about this. And it was a really powerful moment, I think, in that program when we got two key sponsors together, and we got them in a room to spend some time really thinking about what was their inspiration and what was their vision for the future and their why. And I think having both of them in the same room, they realized just how much they were aligned in what they wanted to create, and how much they could both bring to bringing the rest of the business along in that change. So for me, it's that combination of be clear on your strengths, be clear on what you bring and what you offer, and then recognize that there will often be other people who will bring an amazing strength of their own that will only give you a better outcome altogether.
That's a great message. Yes, and we did not lose you at all, so that's really positive. And I do like how we work together, Jenine, because I feel that when I do things in the background to help you as a leader, that enables you to then help other leaders at another level. So I find that it's a very positive domino effect. And
it's a pay it forward program.
There you go. So happy to pay it forward whenever you need. Grant, so you, as a local managing director, you're asked to lead initiatives a lot. And this time around, especially with the COVID, you guys, the executive team has really been working together. So how's it been for you to lead this, not by yourself, but with the rest of the executives by your side?
Yeah, so look, I think any professional services firm like us, by its very nature, it has a whole bunch of stakeholders, and so responsibility has to be shared. You can't be autocratic in an organisation like BDO or any other professional services firm. So I think the starting point is we need to have a group of shared responsibility. And then with that group, you know, I find it's very important to set a few objectives or milestones for the group. And maybe, you know, rules of the game. This is how we're going to, you know, we're going to be together. We're going to be seen as one. So what are the rules of the game? It's not about people just being yes men or yes women, but it's around how we're perceived externally within the organisation, and if there's disagreements, how we're going to manage those disagreements. I think setting a few rules of the game is an important thing, and being united then as you go out there, you know, to do that. So, you know, I think involving people. And the other thing, to your point, Jenine, is around diversity of thinking. You know, so any team, I think, to be successful needs diversity. I'm not, you know, we deal with this every day across our practice with, you know, ensuring we've got gender diversity, for example, at the partner level, you know, which has been a long-term objective for us to deal with that. But, you know, even in a work team like what we're running at the moment around this particular issue of COVID, having different ideas from different people is really critical. So we've got an executive team within BDO in Sydney, which is made up of the I guess the heads of the main divisions, and recently we invited Jenine onto that group. So Jenine, you know, has only been building the people advisory practice within BDO for 4 years, but what Jenine brings to the group is some different thinking, because, you know, no disrespect to the others, but, you know, they've grown up and become senior partners in an accounting practice because they're really good at tax, or they're really good at audit, or really good at whatever that might be. So if we're going to truly make a difference, we need to round that out with some particular skills, and so enabling that diversity to join the team has been really important. So I think, you know, for me, it's been a really interesting process to bring everybody together in this way, and just see what can be done with, you know, more minds sitting around the table than just a few. So.
And
I would just add to that, sorry, Annie-Claude, and just on your you know, strong united front, I think what's really important to recognise is that doesn't mean there's no misalignment sometimes or disagreement in the room. It's actually about having those discussions, putting everything on the table, challenging each other around where we sit and why we sit there from an opinion perspective, and then walking out and saying, right, this is the call that we've made and we stand behind it as a leadership team. And I think that's a really powerful dynamic to have, because it's not about all agreeing. It's actually about having the challenging discussions and then agreeing to disagree and moving forward.
Yeah, and I'd also say that where there are disagreements, you don't want to air the dirty laundry, but be honest. Again, back to the authenticity thing. Be honest that, you know, this is actually a really hard issue that we're dealing with, and there is a diversity of opinions on this, but this is what we've decided to do. Taking all of that into account and all the views of the people around the table, or the virtual table, whatever it might be at the moment, this is the resolution that we've come to, and it may not suit everybody, but we've at least considered it.
And I think that part of the strength of that team that was created was that everyone stepped up. Everyone wanted to play that leader role because they felt it was their responsibility. They understood their role in there. And so we really heard the feedback from everyone across BDO Sydney, because their leaders were there at that virtual table, sitting together and raising the important points that their teams had to say, and making sure that they received all the messages that the executives would decide on. And so there was really a choice of being involved by all the leaders, and we don't always find that. Vanessa, that's the question I wanted to continue and ask you is, when you do have the leader, that's the right leader for an initiative, but they're overwhelmed, they have too much on their plate. What's your recommendation to support that leader in that situation?
Yeah, good one, Annie. I'd say to get really focused. So understanding what are those few things where we really need that leader to be present and visible, or we need their input or their perspective because that will have a big impact on the change and driving it forward. Instead of thinking they need to be involved in everything, it's around supporting them to get really focused and clear on what those priorities are that will have the biggest impact. And that's something that as change managers you can do, and with the project manager. It's also being, for the leaders to be comfortable with leaning on their change team and the project team to do some of the heavy lifting in the background that can take, the drafting of the communications, the speaking notes, the key messages. It's really quite quick to have a 30-minute conversation with a leader to understand what they want to say in their style, and then go away and draft those messages for them and to bring it back to them. It's to simplify their role so that they need to show up, bring their best self, but they have all the tools and the comfort in the background that you've supported them to develop. And then, as Jenine was mentioning, and Grant as well, the whole concept of building a coalition, it's just as simple and informal as asking them and helping them think through when things get rocky, when things get tough, when you need decisions to be pushed forward or roadblocks to be removed, who are you going to pick up the phone and call to help you do that? And who are those people? And then leaning on them when you need to, and bringing them along the change journey as you go through it as a sponsor. I think those three things can help lighten the load for the leaders that are already so busy with everyday work and connecting with their people.
And another challenge that leaders will have, it's true during COVID, but it's true for big, large transformations or global projects. They'll be asked to lead from a distance. So you won't necessarily see them, but you'll need to still be inspired by them through a change. Now, Maryanne, I know that you've led teams across different countries at one time. So I'd like to hear more about you now that we have you back with your connection. What were some things that you put in place to help you as a global leader inspire your teams, even if they could not see you in person?
Thanks, Annie-Claude. Now, if you can't hear me, you need to just do faces like this, then I'll know. So when we think of communication, we usually think about it us communicating with others or us setting up a meeting. Are you losing me?
We're losing you.
We're losing you.
Oh, what a disappointment. I actually really love some of the stories Maryanne can share around this, because she's had some really amazing experience, but unfortunately the internet is just going to conspire against us in today's session. One of the challenges about working remotely. So Annie-Claude, do you want to move on, and we'll ask some other questions?
Yes, of course. And yes, I'm not on mute. Okay. I see the time rolling as well, and usually we try to keep those between 45 and 60 minutes. We're almost at the mark of 45 minutes, so it's okay to continue on another topic. And so we've heard all the great positive theories, and when I hear you guys talk about your experiences, we focused, I think, on the positive, which is an art I like to do. I think it's part of the change manager's role to focus on the positive. But the reality is, you'll have some people that will resist the changes. I think every change has people that resist. That's just normal. And there are many different forms of resistance, but it's hard to understand what is resistance and what isn't. So Vanessa, if you could help us understand, what does it look like? How do you recognize people that are resisting, and how do you address it?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. As I think I've been saying all along, change is scary for many people. I think even those people that say they love change and they thrive off of it and love challenging the status quo, as soon as it happens to you and your comfort zone is being stretched and you're being asked to try something new, there's that fear of the unknown and the possibility that things might fail. And I think that brings up lots of anxiety for many people. And there will be resistance. There will always be resistance, and that's okay. It shows up in different ways depending on the change, and for different people it will look like something else. Some of the most obvious resistance that I've seen in my work has been like a lack of engagement or participation, that people don't deliver on their commitments. You know, you can often see a shift in people's mood as you start to progress down the change journey. You know, when you actually, if it's a physical move, you start to move office furniture, you ask people to do different things, you start to introduce a new technology and remove the old technology. That's when you can really see some shifts in people's mood. You may even see people speaking out or simply just not being willing to try the new, that new future or that new way of working, whatever it may be. They're continuously using workarounds to get around that future state, whatever that might look like. There are many different ways to address it. I think one of the ones that I'd like to share, there's an interesting one, is where you can give people control and a choice that you do so. As little or as big as that choice and that control may be, because when you make a decision as an individual, a personal decision, for example, like buying a house or buying a car, you're in full control of that decision and you're bought into it. Whereas when you come to the workplace and a decision is being pushed on you and you're asking to change how you fundamentally think or behave, that's a bit more challenging because you haven't bought into it necessarily yourself. So where you can give people a choice, whether, you know, or a role to play in the change process, or if it's two options in the future state that you're considering, solicit their input and listen to them when they do speak. It's one thing to ask for the input and give people a choice, and it's another thing to actually act on it. So I would say in terms of resistance, something that's powerful that sometimes we forget is where we can give people that flexibility that we do so.
Can I just add something to what Vanessa just said then, if that's okay? Yeah, I think a big part of leadership is to understand a little bit more about the people who you're leading and what their buttons might be. So some people, you know, everybody's different, and some people need certainty in their life. And change can be a challenge to that certainty. You know, some people need a challenge that they need to rise to, and not changing could be, could be something that they might resist because they want a challenge. You know, and everybody's different. They've all got different drivers and different motivations. So the more as leaders that we can understand what those underlying drivers are for our people, the more we'll be able to be successful with change. And so therefore, we need to get closer to the people to understand them if we're going to drive genuine change through any initiative.
Can I add to what Grant's saying?
Please.
I don't know if you can hear me or not, but when I hear that, that is music to my ears. Because when you have line managers that are actually engaged with their people and understand what they need, the role of the organisation is then to equip the line manager. Have you lost me again? No. So being able to equip the line manager so that then they can carry on with the discussions and know that they can listen and make something happen is actually just as powerful as well. It helps bring the whole thing forward. I'll quiet now.
You're allowed to speak, Maryanne. While we have you and it's working, I'll continue and ask you another question. So we've had some interesting conversations together around this because I said to you, I felt we had a point in common, and that in face of change, the two of us maybe sometimes not resist, but seem like we were resisting. So I'd like for you to explain to the rest of us, how can you give us an example of one change and how you reacted to it that might have been perceived like resisting the change but wasn't?
So, okay, I may not be able to give you an exact example because I don't know if I'm a resistor. However, what I will say is if you come, exactly what Vanessa was saying, which I thought was really powerful, when you come to someone with a formed idea, your ability to translate that idea into the values or the motives or whatever it is of another person becomes very difficult when you've already formed it and you're not clear on what drives another person. So perhaps it may appear I am resisting change if I begin to ask questions. So why are you doing something? What are you trying to achieve? What's the overall outcome? Because for me, I need to be able to fill in the blanks of where we're going and why we're going there. Now, a lot of the time, what I would say to you is you probably need to be a strong line manager to be able to manage me, because I will not stop until I'm really crystal clear in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing it. But once I am clear on that, I don't see myself as a resistor. I actually see myself as somebody who brings people along. So I think the role of the line manager cannot be ignored when you think of people and bringing them along. So for those of you that are listening, if you work in hierarchical organizations where everything you do only goes to the top, I'm telling you now, you're missing about 20 tricks. You need to make sure all your line managers get the messages, and the other messages that you're disseminating, you need to make sure your staff hear. The more aligned your messages are, the more powerful and the more easier it is for people to get on board, because they can understand where you're going.
It's like your internet has this thing where the longer you talk, it likes to fade you out. But we got all of that. Thank you, Maryanne. I will say, as Maryanne's line manager, the great thing about managing someone like Maryanne, and if you have someone in your team who challenges your thinking in that way, it actually really helps you get clear on your why. Because if you come to someone who, you know, with a really well-informed decision and you're not actually clear on your why, and you're talking to someone with Maryanne's sort of mindset, you will really struggle to explain that. And what I loved about what everybody was saying on this, you know, the question Annie-Claude is about to ask me is around managing resistance, and I'm just going to jump straight in there, because I've gone through so many changes as well as the person being put through a change program. So, you know, we've gone through global HR transformations in our roles, and I have been a really strong resistor in some of those shifts, and I will very much put my hand up and say that I have. But what's really interesting is, you know, I think very much around our talent, and I think to Grant's point, 399 of us are really, really smart people. We've invested money in recruiting these smart people. We've invested time, energy, and money in developing them and retaining them and rewarding them for their performance. And then we want to come to them with a formed idea and say, guys, I don't need your opinions on all of this. This is where we're going and this is why we're doing it. So in fact, I'd probably feel more uncomfortable if I presented a change to the team and the team just went, oh, okay, well, if it's coming from you, we must know it's right. When we know that's not the case. We know a small group of people are never going to have the full perspective. And so often as change managers, we're trying to go out and convince people that their roles need to be done differently when we've never done those roles before. So I think that's a really powerful point, is recognizing that early in the process, truly seeking to understand what the impact of that change might be and being prepared to change. I remember doing a restructure in one of my last jobs. We spent weeks going through what this new strategy was going to be as a leadership team, how we were going to align the team behind it, deciding who we were going to appoint in a couple of key leadership roles. We sat down, we appointed the individuals, we took them through the work, and they went, yep, great, I'd love to do the job, but I don't agree with how you're going to make this happen, and I don't believe that the structure you've put in place is going to get us there. Now, we had a choice at that point in time to go, oh yeah, but we've been in a room, we've looked at this for a month now, of course it's right. Or we could sit there and go, actually, the whole reason why we're putting you in this role is because we think you're going to be an amazing leader, and because we think you've got a really strong future and direction for this team. So the first thing we're going to do is say, okay, that's fine. We're going to lean in and recognize that you're going to have some perspective that's valuable. So I think sometimes as a leader, recognizing, to Vanessa's point before, that sometimes it's okay to change the change. It's okay to say, actually, I didn't think through all of this, and your feedback's telling me that there is something that I missed. So how more powerful can you be than to stand up and say, I've heard what you've said, and I think I got some things wrong, or I think we got some things wrong, or I think we could do things differently, and we're going to actually take on board some of your suggestions. When you're dealing with resistance, I think that's probably the most powerful thing you can do, recognizing it's not always possible, and some of the bigger complex changes that might be challenging. But I would hazard a guess that in most projects there are some things that you could take on board feedback and shift if you had the desire to do so.
And Jenine, just on that, some of the things that we help organisations do is actually work out who are the individuals that will help the team crystallise their thinking before it goes out. So initially people might think they're not. So really knowing who it is that will help the team move forward actually helps you accelerate that acceptance. And it helps you build stronger plans, stronger thinking.
That's exactly right. And that's what Grant was talking about when we looked at our Agile project, was sitting down and thinking, well, who are those people that historically we might have come up against as resistors early on? And in fact, they just have really strong views, and they have strong views that align to probably strong views represented by many other people in our organisation. So instead of preparing ourselves to argue against them, what if we brought them into the fold and got those views early and factored that into the change that we're creating?
And the other thing I'd add to that, if I may, is that, you know, within any organisation, there's networks of people. You know, so each one of these businesses is made up of networks of people, and those networks, there's some really strong parts of the network and there's some really weak parts of the network. So you need to work out who are the influencers, who are the strong parts of the network, and make sure that you're addressing them, because they're going to actually spread the story out further and help with the project.
Yeah.
I must say, I'm very impressed with how you talk about your experience, Grant, and the change management in general. I knew it was a good idea to have you on this webinar today, but I did, and we didn't, just so people know that are listening, we did not prepare messages for Grant to say specific things. It's very natural how you talk about the changes and how involving people is important, and I find that very inspiring. And the question I'd like to leave everyone on is, Grant, so today I hear you and I think here's a change management specialist. I don't know Grant from 10 years ago, but what do you know today that Grant from 10 years ago you think he would have benefited from knowing about change management?
About change management, not other stuff. There's lots.
It could be a longer question.
There's a lot of other. Yeah, it could be a longer question. No. Look, I think there's a couple of things. You know, I think, you know, I had an idea about some of these things, but it becomes more apparent as you start to run these projects, and the more and more we're seeing technology take over our lives the way it has. I think one of the things would be that change is constant. Like, it is going to happen. It is happening. So there's no, you know, to me, don't resist it, because it's going to happen around you if you know. And so I think everybody needs to understand that change will happen, and we need to be constantly adapting and agile around that. I do think, you know, one thing I've learned more recently, as I mentioned earlier, is, you know, if we can use the values of an organisation as a centering piece, I think that's been really powerful for me to understand that. And then the last thing would be listen. You know, if you can learn to listen to what's happening around you and what's happening with the people around you, you can make positive change. But if you don't listen, you'll never do it. So I don't know. I mean, I was trying to think, because you know, what would be things that I've learned, and you know, you're always learning along the way. But they'd be probably the three themes.
Thank you, Grant. I've been very inspired. I know that it's a cheeky word to use because that was the title of our webinar, but listening to leaders, I do find it inspiring, and I hope that everyone who's listening is now thinking, I have changes that I'm involved in, whether it's as a leader in an HR role, or even a person receiving a change. And the two pieces of advice that I'd like to leave everyone on today is, and I think it's inspired again by what you guys have just said. The first thing would be to start with the why. When there's a change around you, understand why it's happening. That can be your role as a person receiving a change, but if you're in a leadership role, make sure you help the people around you understand that why, and involve them into defining what it means and the benefits that you can get out of a change that you're working on. And the second thing, because of my sports orientation in general in life, surround yourself with the best team possible. You are only as good as the people around you, and people can really elevate you as a professional, but as a person as well. So make sure that you do surround yourself with people that help you navigate through life and through changes better. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Jenine, Maryanne, Vanessa, for being with us today. Jenine, is there any last word you would like to leave us on?
Oh, look, I think like you, I always just love working with this team. I love, getting an opportunity to talk to someone like Grant, in a very different role to the role that we do. So I think if anybody takes just that 5 minutes after a session like today to think about some changes that they're involved in and the role that they can play in those changes, I think that can be a really powerful thing. It's great to watch a webinar like this, and then it's really easy to just walk away and get caught up in the day-to-day grind. So I think if you could just take 5 minutes when you log off today to think about what would I do differently, either as a change leader or as a person in an organization who's impacted by change, what would that be? And I would always say, if you have any questions, we are so happy to talk to you. So please do reach out. You'll get an email after today. We love talking about this stuff, as you might tell, and usually our internet's better, so we can have the conversation in a more fluid manner. But thank you so much for managing this session today, managing all of us, Annie-Claude, and leading us through this. I think you've done very well for your first webinar, so well done. Thanks, team.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
All
Thank
right.
you, everybody. Bye.
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 Bye.